At 3:41 a.m. in Little Rock, Arkansas, federal agents launched what briefing officials in this fictional story called the largest coordinated trucking corridor narcotics takedown ever uncovered in the region. 42 properties hit, 34 commercial rigs seized, 2 terminal yards locked down, more than 300 kilos of cocaine, 87 kilos of heroin, 112 kilos of methamphetamine, and over 1.9 million fentanyl pills intercepted before sunrise. Estimated criminal exposure. Bestowers were years poor $1.4 billion. That was the public line in the first fictional briefing. Short, sharp, heavy enough to stop a room cold, but the numbers were only the surface. Because what investigators were describing was not just a drug bust at an Arkansas trucking terminal. It was not just a Mexican cartel slipping narcotics through freight lanes under fake seals and forged manifests. It was a transport empire buried inside ordinary commerce. A hidden system moving cocaine, heroin, fentanyl, meth, bulk cash, forged IDs, and human cargo through Arkansas trucking corridors with the rhythm of lawful business and the protection of men who believed the interstate itself belonged to them. And if that sounds massive, the truth inside this fictional story is worse. Much worse, because the terminal was only the door. Behind it was the machine. At 4:28 a.m., the first strike teams rolled toward an industrial terminal complex on the eastern side of Little Rock. The roads were black with rain. Diesel fumes hung low over the yard. Sodium floodlights burned against rows of white trailers lined up like sleeping animals. The metal skins wet and shining. Somewhere beyond the terminal fence, a train horn dragged through the dark. Then engines cut. Doors opened. Boots hit gravel. DEA tactical units moved in from the north gate. ICE agents sealed the outbound lanes. FBI support teams took the administration block while SWAT teams advanced between trailer lines and tight columns, faces hidden, rifles up, moving like shadows between refrigeration units and stacked pallets. DHS task force officers locked down the dispatch office and scale house within seconds. No one was supposed to leave. No one was supposed to warn anyone. The first breach came hard. A steel side door blew inward beneath a hydraulic ram. Flashbangs detonated inside a maintenance corridor. Glass shattered in the operations booth above the yard. Men in black flooded into offices packed with root boards, freight screens, and radios still hissing half-finished dispatch calls. One suspect reached for a handgun under a desk and was dropped before he could clear the drawer. Another ran through the loading aisle dragging a duffel bag so heavy it tore open, spraying bundled cash and shrink-wrapped narcotics across the concrete. At the far end of the terminal, 2 drivers tried to fire up a tractor unit connected to a sealed refrigerated trailer, but the cab windows exploded inward as SWAT teams smashed entry points and pulled them out into the rain. Then the yard opened up. Trailer after trailer was hit. One reefer marked as processed poultry held tightly packed cocaine bricks hidden behind false insulation panels. A produce trailer registered to a ghost subcontractor contained heroin vacuum sealed inside palletized tomato boxes. A livestock feed hauler carried methamphetamine in welded floor voids, accessible only through concealed bolts under the chassis. In a dry van listed as retail overflow, federal agents found plastic drums filled with fentanyl pill presses, dyes, binder agents, and preloaded counterfeit tablet stamps. This was no random stash point. This was a rolling distribution architecture. By 5:06 a.m., strike teams had raided not only the terminal, but a nearby truck wash, a fueling depot, a strip mall tax office used for shell payroll, 2 driver flop houses, and a warehouse dressed up as an agricultural storage site. The seizures came in fast, then faster. Cocaine, heroin, meth, fentanyl powder, fentanyl pills. Assault rifles wrapped in moving blankets, shotguns behind panel walls, handguns in sleeper cabs, burners by the dozens, fake DOT records, counterfeit weight certificates, ledger books coded by lane, trailer type, and destination market. And then came the thing that changed the whole case. Inside a sealed steel compartment hidden beneath the terminal dispatch room, agents found not only bundled currency and narcotics proceeds, but hardened encrypted drives, a private server array cooled by an improvised vent system, and 3 black lockboxes containing route authorization sheets with federal lane references, way station timing data, inspection avoidance schedules, and payment lists marked with initials next to badge numbers, dispatcher IDs, and state transport contacts. That was the moment this fictional operation stopped looking like a freight-based cartel node and started looking like command-level collusion. At 8:14 a.m., inside a temporary FBI cyber forensics center established under emergency authority in Little Rock, the next phase began. The room was cold and overlit. Screens flickered with mirrored drives, route maps, banking trails, and fragments of encrypted message chains. Analysts rotated in shifts, feeding cloned data through recovery tools, while financial investigators built link charts between trucking firms, leasing companies, insurance carriers, labor recruiters, churches used as pass-through charities, and logistics consultancies that existed mostly on paper, coffee cups piled up beside evidence bags. No one bothered sitting for long. When the encryption finally started to crack, the network appeared all at once. A codename sat in the middle of the digital architecture like a branded stamp burned into every layer of the system. Iron Lantern. That name appeared on route overrides, rerouted inspections, seal replacement requests, phantom trailer transfers, fuel reimbursements, detention adjustments, and emergency dispatch notices pushed out only hours before known contraband movements. Around it spread a sprawling web of ghost corporations, sham maintenance vendors, offshore payment channels, fake nonprofit foundations for driver families, restaurant chains washing street cash through inflated receipts, and regional logistics firms that manipulated spoilage claims, idle time reports, and damaged cargo credits to disguise disappearing inventory and hidden narcotics. Loads. Money moved from Arkansas to Texas. From Texas to shell entities in Belize, from there into freight finance accounts in Florida, then back into equipment leasing pools and local operating budgets. What looked like normal commercial noise was actually a laundering engine. Every invoice told one story, every transfer told another. And at the center of Iron Lantern, investigators found the digital signature of the fictional mastermind. Gideon Vane, publicly known as a respected trucking logistics director and consultant for corridor efficiency programs, privately functioning as the network's invisible air traffic controller. Vane did not need to touch the cocaine. He did not need to ride with fentanyl pills or supervise methamphetamine hidden under produce pallets. He controlled something more valuable than product. He controlled movement. His encrypted authorization key appeared in lane downgrades, compliance exemptions, emergency reroute notices, and digital approvals tied to freight windows that consistently aligned with cartel trafficking operations. Investigators linked him directly to Mexican cartel logistics managers using Arkansas as a central freight artery, turning the state's highways, terminals, warehouses, and service roads into a secure inland drug empire hub disguised as ordinary trucking commerce. This was not corruption. It was command-level collusion. This was not negligence. It was engineered treason wrapped in clipboards, route software, and dispatch jargon. And if you think that was the end of it, it was not even the midpoint. Because once the system map was visible, the federal response escalated. At 5:37 a.m. the following day, in a regional command center outside North Little Rock, a wall-sized digital map glowed with red markers pulsing across Arkansas trucking corridors. Little Rock, North Little Rock, Conway, West Memphis, Fort Smith, Jonesboro, Pine Bluff, smaller industrial parks, fuel yards, cross-dock facilities, repair garages, empty churches used for cash staging, low-cost motels holding relay drivers and couriers. Every pulsing light represented a terminal, route node, stash site, laundering front, communications relay, or compromised facilitator linked to Iron Lantern and to Gideon Vane's network. The mission order was brutal in its scale. More than 800 federal agents and task force officers were assigned to the broader fictional eradication phase. DEA, ICE, FBI, DHS, US, Marshal support teams, vetted state units, and local SWAT teams cleared through emergency integrity review. Armored rescue vehicles staged near terminal approaches. Surveillance aircraft orbited above key freight lanes. Helicopter support stood ready for tracking and containment. This was not a theatrical show of force. It was a message to a cartel system built on certainty. Your corridors are no longer safe. The strikes hit in waves. A warehouse outside Conway, listed as a paper goods distributor, was found to contain pallet stacks concealing cocaine bricks, methamphetamine drums, and cash counters wired to hidden cameras. In West Memphis, agents raided a truck repair compound where mechanics had spent years building false walls inside refrigerated trailers and sleeper cabs for narcotics transport. Near Pine Bluff, a so-called driver rest center turned out to be a human trafficking holding site where undocumented laborers were cycled through debt bondage, forced dispatch work, and narcotics concealment runs under threat of violence against family members. At an agricultural transfer point near Jonesboro, federal agents intercepted a convoy of grain haulers carrying heroin inside fabricated hopper compartments. In a rich neighborhood outside Little Rock, a sprawling home owned through layered LLCs became the arrest site for a cartel finance broker and two white-collar laundering specialists who had spent years presenting themselves as freight investors and philanthropic donors. In Fort Smith, SWAT teams breached a fortified dispatch office with ballistic glass, internal steel doors, and a panic room holding encrypted radios, duplicate seals, deroute logs, and a second server farm tied to interstate tracking. The seizures piled up across the state. Dozens of rifles, handguns by the crate, bulk currency in shrink-wrapped stacks, gold bars, counterfeit commercial plates, portable signal jammers, route binders with coded references to cocaine, heroin, fentanyl pills, and meth shipments, hard drives storing years of delivery data, communication hubs that monitored enforcement chatter, fraudulent way certificates, corrupt payroll logs, USB devices containing blackmail files on cooperating insiders. Key cartel members were captured alive. So were dispatch coordinators, shell company accountants, terminal supervisors, and compromised transport facilitators who had believed the highways would always protect them. By the end of the main sweep, the federal teams in this fictional story had damaged the network so severely that analysts said the underworld took more damage in 6 hours than in the last 6 years. But then investigators opened the internal files. That was when the rot inside the system truly showed itself. Server logs, deleted messages, route records, inspection notes, and internal emails revealed a corruption pattern far beyond one logistics director and a handful of paid traffickers. The cartel had cultivated a support ring inside transport enforcement, commercial inspection, and local administration. Certain way stations were suddenly closed for maintenance exactly when protected convoys rolled through. Freight safety checks were redirected. Patrol grids were thinned on nights involving high-value narcotics. Movement. The dispatch alerts leaked hours before interdiction attempts. Some officers were not even told the whole truth. They were manipulated through selective information. Others knew exactly what they were doing. In the fictional case file, investigators identified more than 24 compromised insiders across the wider support network. Some were low-level clerks with access to route audits. Some were transport inspectors who looked the other way after being paid in cash, vehicles, or fake consulting retainers. Some were law enforcement contacts who leaked surveillance interest or delayed warrant service by just enough time to let cartel members reposition drugs, cash, or people. A deputy commander attached to a regional highway task unit was accused of falsifying corridor risk profiles. A senior sergeant was tied to raid schedule leaks. A civilian systems planner altered digital patrol deployment windows. A contract compliance officer downgraded red flag carriers in exchange for monthly payments routed through sham charities and church outreach funds. For the honest officers and agents, this was the worst part. One fictional investigator reportedly recognized the name of a former mentor inside a leak chain tied to fentanyl loads that later spilled into communities hundreds of miles away. Another officer, after reading message traffic between compromised officials and traffickers, understood that seizures he once believed were lucky had actually been sacrificial loads sent to protect much larger shipments. They were not just fighting a cartel. They had been working beside it without knowing. That kind of betrayal scars institutions. Federal agents began arresting insiders in uniforms, office polos, and government windbreakers. Not movie villains, not men with gold-plated rifles standing on rooftops. Quiet professionals. Schedulers. Inspectors. Mid-level planners. The exact kind of people who make systems function. That was what made it so dangerous. The cartel had not built a visible occupation force. It had built a second secret police force made of permissions, delays, leaks, and silence. A parallel enforcement system hidden inside the legitimate one, controlled by cartel money and directed by Gideon Vane's protected logistics empire. The badge, one fictional official said during the aftermath, would have to be rebuilt from the ground up. Then the map widened again. Analysts connected Arkansas freight records to terminals and relay points in Oklahoma. In Tennessee, Mississippi, Missouri, Louisiana, and beyond. The state had served as a central hinge in a continental supply chain. Agricultural routes carried cocaine one week and methamphetamine the next. Refrigerated freight covered heroin movement. Oversized equipment transports concealed cash returns. Migrant smuggling routes fed labor pools for terminal work. Stash house security and high-risk driver assignments. Human trafficking victims were used as disposable support labor around loading yards and fraudulent dispatch operations. Everything touched everything else. Investigators estimated the network could move tons of narcotics per week through blended freight streams without triggering immediate systemic alarm. Shipping manifests were altered through nested subcontractors. Seal numbers were swapped mid-route. The way station systems were manipulated or bypassed through timed closures. Cargo discrepancies were explained away as spoilage, damaged goods, repackaging errors, or transfer mismatches between vendors. By the time a question surfaced, the trailer had moved, the paperwork had shifted, and the narcotics were already gone into city markets. And then came the final catastrophic file. Buried in an archive tied to Vane's encrypted signature was a strategic expansion document outlining a 10-year corridor consolidation plan. It described Arkansas not as a temporary transit zone, but as a permanent inland headquarters for a cartel-aligned freight empire. It proposed buying influence inside local transport boards, funding warehouse development through fake green energy logistics grants, acquiring distressed terminals through shell bidders, and embedding loyal facilitators into compliance, security, labor recruiting, and route planning. It even included contingency protocols for managing political pressure through donations, pressure campaigns, and selective blackmail. That was the real horror. The system had not simply been infiltrated, it had been redesigned for the cartel future, and that is the warning inside this fictional dramatization. Power does not always need open violence. Sometimes it does not need gunfire at all. Sometimes it only needs silence, paperwork, ambition, and enough compromised people to turn a lawful corridor into a hidden artery for poison. Because the cost is never confined to a terminal yard in the dark. It spreads outward, into emergency rooms flooded by fentanyl overdoses, into neighborhoods broken by methamphetamine, was into families buried under heroin addiction, into children growing up where cocaine money buys silence and fear buys loyalty, into entire communities that do not realize the trailer passing on the interstate is carrying the next wave of destruction wrapped beneath legitimate cargo. That is how organized crime wins when institutions become sleepy, greedy, or afraid. It does not always conquer by force. Sometimes it partners, sometimes it pays. Sometimes it studies the weak seams in a democracy and slides straight through them wearing a safety vest and carrying a clipboard.